Well, this is a very rich time of the liturgical year. On the first of this month, we kept All Saints, on the second, All Souls, and throughout this month, and today too, Remembrance Sunday, we are keeping all the departed in mind, known and unknown, and we are bringing them before the Lord in our prayer and at Mass and so on. And then on the horizon is the Solemnity of Christ the King. That'll be the 22nd. And then we slip into Advent on the evening of the 28th. And with those things and with the readings that we have just heard, another element emerges. It is that of the coming of Christ. We're obviously being invited to look beyond the immediate, and what immediately preoccupies us, and be sensitive to what in Catholic tradition we call the last things. It's an article of our faith that the Lord will come again. He will come in glory. He will come to judge the living and the dead, separating the sheep from the goats. He will come to transfigure our human bodies and the whole universe and hand over the kingdom to his Father, when God will be all in all. These are big thoughts, we might say, and the New Testament is full of them, and the creeds re-echo them, and every Mass mysteriously contains them. Christ comes sacramentally in every Mass, anticipating what we call the parousia. The parousia is a Greek word for the coming, especially the second coming of Christ. I think I'm permitted to tell a story that might make you smile. One of our seminarians, he won't mind me telling it, but there was a time in his life when he was doing catechesis for young children, and he would so often talk about the parousia that they nicknamed him Mr. Parousia, our catechist. Well, that's not a bad nickname to get. But here's a theme for today, that Christ is the God who comes. And the readings unpack this. In the first reading from the Old Testament, Christ comes as wisdom. It's beautifully described. Wisdom is portrayed almost as a person, an independent agent, one with God and yet somehow distinct from God. She shows herself to those who are looking for her. She's looking for us herself. She walks around. She shows herself as we follow our path through life, and it says in every thought of theirs, that's of ours, coming to meet them. So already now, in our daily life, even in what goes on in our funny heads, Christ comes. He meets us. It's worth dwelling on this. I can remember as a boy watching a game, football or whatever, and I suddenly realized, well, here's this game going on, and I am watching this game, but not only that, I can think about this game. I can form ideas about it. I can describe it in words. And it came to me, really, wow, how wonderful. We don't just see things or undergo things, we can think about them. We can think about them. It's extraordinary. And as I say, put them into words in our minds. It's quite a gift. And then, in a way crowning that, comes this line from wisdom, how she comes to meet us in our every thought. We can meet God in what we think. Our thinking can be a kind of sacrament. Now, over the centuries, the spiritual tradition of the Church has elaborated, a wisdom you might say, criteria for judging which kind of thought is outside Christ, incompatible with Christ, which kind of thought is just neutral, and which is from Christ or with Christ. This is called the discernment of spirits or the discernment of thoughts. Broadly speaking, if a thought is of something good, even if initially disconcerting, it ultimately brings peace, makes for humility and patience, and at the same time lifts us up, brings joy perhaps, makes us feel well disposed toward others, not dark or bitter or anti or full of self-pity, well then it is a coming of Christ. It's something to be cherished, to be turned into prayer or put into action, acted upon. And so, even in the daily workings of our mind, yes, Christ can meet us. You will find her, we heard, wisdom, sitting at your gates. The bridegroom is coming. Open the doors. Well, that brings us to the gospel. Now, it's full of intriguing things, but let's just focus on one. All the girls in the parable, the 10 girls, and they are us, of course, all the girls, whether they have oil or not, fall asleep. They all fall asleep. It's nighttime. It's dark. It's this life, really, waiting for Christ. And of course, when we are asleep, we are somewhere else. We're in slumberland or we're in dreamland. And then suddenly, while we are far gone, lost in our own world, there is a cry. And it comes from nowhere. Who cries? We're never told. It's just a cry. The bridegroom is coming. It's not the bridegroom himself. It's something else. There's just this sudden voice. Now we might remember how John the Baptist described himself as a voice crying in the wilderness. And here is a voice in the night. It wakes the girls up. Panic ensues, and their hair is all in a mess. And there's a scramble and a squabble over the oil. The bridegroom is coming. Now this really is a parable for us, because so often we are in our own world, full of our own plans, not necessarily bad at all. We think we're fully awake, but perhaps in the Lord's eyes we're actually asleep to what really matters. But a cry, not the bridegroom himself, notice, but a cry breaks in on us. Well, dare I say it, think of COVID. Think of those heartbreaking scenes in First World War films when the postman comes on his bike with the dreaded telegram for the family saying, your son has fallen on the Western Front. Think of unexpected diagnoses, job loss. I remember we had a monk, he was always sort of humorous about it, but sometimes he'd get pains in his chest. And he would say, got pains in my chest, the distant murmur of the bridegroom. Well, but they may be joyful things too. A new relationship, a child, a new task. These are the surprising voices in our lives. Suddenly, there was a cry, wake-up calls. And the second reading, the Thessalonians, St. Paul, explicitly about the second coming. But there's the same pattern. There's a trumpet blown. There's the voice of an archangel. And then after that, the bridegroom comes. The Lord comes like a burglar, he says somewhere. He comes on the heels of always unexpected, sometimes contrary, inexplicable things. Christ is the God who comes. And why does he come? He comes to take us up, says St. Paul, to raise us from the dead, to take us to a wedding feast, to bring us joy, and perhaps, first of all, to bring us just into safety, the everlasting arms. So maybe there's a spiritual exercise that we can draw from today's readings, to go back over our lives, to reread them in the light of the Christ who comes. Now, our life is a string of events, good, bad, and indifferent. But going deeper, it's a series of comings, of calls, of cries in the night, of trumpets and angels waking us up. And all of those comings, all of those calls and the coming, if we respond trustingly and simply, maybe that's what the oil means, maybe that means having the oil. If we respond in a trusting, simple, obedient way, they bring us to joy. So may that be the path that this liturgy, this Mass, our faith opens up for us.